few years ago, there was a Swedish businessman, and he'd done well in business, and he sold all of his investments and put his money into a foundation, Global Challenges Foundation, saying, I want to ask people to find ideas to address and solve all the great challenges, the risks to the world that could kill more than 10% of the world population. So he put up $5 million in prize money, saying, everybody give me ideas, what can we do to save the world? And inevitably, that attracted lots of interest. And among the 3 ebbf members, we thought, the Baha'i inspiration from ebbf talks a bit about maybe we have some ideas to contribute in this process. We put together a little proposal according to their guidelines, along with 14,000 other groups. Then when we heard that they'd accepted 2,700 applications, well, no chance of doing anything. Let's forget about that, we'll write a book instead. So we are just in the process of finishing writing a book on global governance. We need to start building what we have in the United Nations system. It's done lots of good things. Everybody is there around the table. It has a certain number of fatal flaws. Can we correct them? Can we improve them? So we've thought through in great detail, what do we need to change to make the system work? Clearly, the veto of the Security Council, where 5 countries put themselves above the law and they can prevent the system from doing anything against their own national interests, is a fatal flaw in the system. This prevented it from addressing problems at that level. And it's also preventing the United Nations from changing, because they also have a veto over any changes in the Charter. But there are all those problems that didn't exist in 1945, that used to be able to drive and get all these bugs on your windscreen, on your windshield, and now it doesn't happen anymore. Where all the bugs have gone, and they have vanished, basically. Just recent studies have shown that we've wiped out 60-80% of all the insect life, even in Europe and America and around the world. And since we depend on this for our survival, we depend on the ecosystems of the planet. We have all the problems of migration, as the world has globalized and as more governments fail and don't meet the needs of the citizens, people are fleeing or they're driven by chaos, confusion, war, other things to leave. We're seeing thousands, hundreds of people moving around the world, millions, with climate change that could become hundreds of millions of people forced to move. We have a financial system at which debt has increased by 34% since the last financial crisis. Governments are more and more indebted. Businesses are more heavily indebted. Is this a giant debt bubble? And if it bursts, what would that do? So how do we deal with this kind of a catastrophic risk for the stability of societies, like climate change, where it's clear we need to act at a global level? And while we've done a lot to act from a convention on climate change, there's no enforcement. Everything is still voluntary at the level of what promises are made to reduce greenhouse gases. If you have a change in administration and don't like what was really, simply withdraw and say we're going to abandon it and go on do our own way. And so we still have global anarchy among states when it comes to addressing these challenges, and that the challenges are becoming more and more insistent. They're getting closer and closer. So it seems to be quite urgent to do something about it. So having spent a couple of years thinking through the changes that are needed, what do you do next? Having some good ideas is one thing. How do you build a global movement for governance, for changes in the system that will be strong enough to overcome all the resistances out there in the society? Clearly, many of these are things no one government can do by itself. They all require some kind of global response. Well, Costa Rica said, we're going to have peace and security. We'll get rid of the army. In 1949, they were tired of military coup d'etats upsetting the government. They've done very well as a small country by themselves since then, much better than most of their neighbors in Central America. And yet at the world level, everybody's, don't trust each other, they're arming themselves and so on. How do we grow to maturity at the local level? And that's really the issue I wanted to put on the table this morning for this meaningful conversation. Do you have ideas? What would you do if you had thought through the issues and come up with some reasonable solutions, improve the structures, so you could bring more scientific advice into the system so that the decisions are made within the framework what science says is possible or impossible? How do you bring in the ethical, the values dimension, building on the principles already in the UN Charter, Declaration of Human Rights, and all the other agreements that are made? Governments are very good at signing up to good principles. We have all the principles out there. It's putting them into practice. is getting it to work. Say, what ideas do we have to create a movement for global governance? How do we find friendly governments who like the idea and are willing to invest in doing that? How do we develop citizen movements that can, one way or another, can create pressure on their governments to do something? We thought, for instance, just to give you one example, take the issue of the veto in the Security Council. That has been the blocking point, where if Russia doesn't like something, they can stop it. If America doesn't like something, they can stop it. The 5 permanent members, each of them, if they want to defend their national interests, they can prevent any action from happening. How do you get around those 5 powers, so to speak, and make some progress? So we thought, well, you do as was done with the League of Nations and the United Nations. You say, we will build a successor organization. And if enough governments were willing to say, we're going to do something better, we're going to adopt a new United World Organization with a new charter, we're going to give it a better financial mechanism, say 0.1% of the GDP of each country as their automatic contribution to the budget of this new organization, so that it becomes 5 times as rich as the present United Nations, get it off the ground, and get it working, even if not all the countries are there yet, and then you propose a merger or a buyout of the old UN and move all the good things from one into the other, and you go ahead. And if there are a few governments holding back, maybe after a few years the pressures will grow, or they feel, well, we can't be left out of it anymore, we will go and join it. So we're saying, are there some reasonable ways forward? Oh, I didn't mention that when it finally came to the prize award, we took first place with our ideas in the awards ceremony last May. They liked idea best of all the 2,700 ideas that were put forward in that prize competition. So we got a little certain momentum there we hadn't expected to help take this forward. And so we're sort of actively, with all the others who are involved in this process, saying, how do we put together the different pieces of a movement towards world governance that might give us a chance to save the world from itself? So that's really the challenge I throw out this morning, whether it be how to bring scientific information to push governments to listen to science for a change, instead of rewriting the science like the climate if they don't like it. For aside from saying the sea level might rise, they don't like it, it's bad for coastal investments in real estate, and therefore they will simply pass a law making sea level rise illegal. This is the logic of our decision makers today.
There is a working group that has been created with the support of the foundation in order to promote and have the implementation of the plan happen. This working group is now working on the idea of having 10,000 conversations between now and 2020, which is the 75th anniversary of the creation of the United Nations. So we are not alone in the world. Actually, just last month in December, we had a series of this type of conversations in several universities, for example, in Latin America. This is happening in different places, and we can just start one conversation which every single one of you can continue in your own community.
Mahmud is part of that working group. So this has been sort of ebbf-led, but it's going much further than that. And the opportunities are opening up. I mean, I was asked to go to the Parliament in London and to sort of, in the Parliament on these issues. Augusto Lopez Claros, who's one of our members who's been leading the process, was invited to meet with a meeting of chief justices of the world in India to give them the idea. We have a meeting in New York with top officials at the United Nations. And there's interest. And the fact that there are some reasonable ways forward, it's not simply totally idealistic, we're actually trying to map out steps forward that could build some momentum, shows that maybe the time has come to overcome 75 years of resistance and blockage and actually try to save the world. It's all in our interest, if we can, to save a few billion lives, and therefore I think it's worth investing some time in. So please jump in with your ideas. How can the impact hubs help to spread this? I think you also put in a proposal to the Global Challenges Foundation, so you already were part of the thinking at that point. So jump on board. Let's take it some ways further. What are your ideas, your suggestions to contribute?
Many of the ideas have really been around for a very long time, and people who think about the problems we're facing, are very much aware of these things. To me, it seems to always become unstuck because whether it be at the government level, America first, or the individual level with the Gilets jaunes not wanting to pay more for their diesel, it comes back to this is better for me rather than saying this is better for us. The whole decision-making process has become subverted to what's best for me, what's best for my company, what's best for my country even, but there's no thought about how do we blend that with what's best for us. It almost needs a theological leadership as opposed to a fix the bits and pieces approach. How do we convince concern for one's neighbor, that we're a community, that we're in this together, that if I am too focused on me, that's not going to, in the long run, be good. And I don't.
The Baha'is have been working on this for 175 years. In the longer term, our aim is to try to bring that spirit of values, that sense of global community, of unity and diversity, and seeing the whole together. But we also acknowledge we're not going to do that in time to address the problems of governance. And there's going to be forces outside of us that have to move faster to actually bring some kind of peace in the world, to solve the issues at the global government level before we can keep evolving towards that larger understanding. Yes, that's the long-term solution. We all have to work at that at some level, which means that change in individual values, change in community values, change in values at all levels. Are there things we can do in the shorter term to leapfrog, to save us from some of the worst catastrophes, while that deeper solution is being put into place?
I think that what I'm observing is that there are these tensions in the world today where many millions of people have evolved to a state of human consciousness where they feel physically and emotionally and spiritually uncomfortable and distressed by the state of the world, and they want to do something about it. And the system that we live in is based on the old paradigm, and it's solidified over many centuries even of old ways of thinking. So we're in this tipping point where we have to break and rebuild based on what the majority, I think probably around the world, the majority of people want a better world. They want those things. And many people, I believe, are going through transformations where they are coming to a more spiritual perspective on things. I would put it in those terms. And I think that what could be incredibly powerful would be just the fact of recognizing one another, building many different contributions. The fact that we all raise our hands to say, we want that, and we know that we each as individuals have gifts and unique perspectives and contributions that we can bring. And if we join our forces together through simply being aware of one another and aware of what we're all doing, then you can achieve incredible breakthroughs. So it's not through the concrete actions of we've got to make it happen, we've got to change the way people think. Probably people are already in that space, but we have to create the conditions for people to recognise one another and come together. And I love the idea of these dialogues where people can come together with that intention, with that focus, and that could make all the difference, I think.
The only thing that makes change impossible is individuals' feeling of not being able to change. And if I were the evil force in the world that wanted to make sure I will rule forever, I would make people feel that what I do is not going to matter. So really, together, this conversation and everything that will follow is for the purpose of everybody taking responsibility for what they want to happen without thinking that it will not happen. Just to give you an example, in one of these conversations in Ecuador last month, after hearing about the proposed changes, global governance, etc., somebody said, but this is all about some institutions in Geneva and in New York. They take our money, taxpayer, and they waste it. Why should I care about the United Nations and what it does? Everybody has heard that 3 million Venezuelans are out of their country. And where have they gone? To Colombia, to Ecuador, and to Peru. At every corner of the street in these countries, you see a Venezuelan with something saying, I am from Venezuela, please help me. This has affected local economies. They are replacing local workers, and there is a resistance to the presence of 500,000 Venezuelans in Ecuador. The question that I asked the audience you only care about your own local problems and you don't want to know what is happening elsewhere, one question: who is going to help you resolve the issue of immigrants? If we want a solution to the problem of migration, we need an international solution. That brought home to that audience that the UN system is not something alien to them, but it's their everyday life. This is what we want to do, for everybody to realize that this is part of our everyday life. We have a say in it, and there is no fatality in something not to change. We had no international system by the beginning of last century. We have already tried 2 of them, the League and the United Nations, and we're going to do the next one now.
We are talking about governance, values, and money. Basically, we need to have common definitions on governance, values, and money. And before having a common agreed definition, I don't think that you can have any system that can, help you. And once we have the common definitions, we need to link them together, and link them in a systematic way and contextual, meaning the interests of Argentina are not necessarily the same interest as France. So if we need to have common global governance, we cannot actually go through common laws, because this will be extremely impossible, because we don't have common values. So I think that this picture, the global goals, are an anchor point, and I think that we can work on that one, where everyone agrees to it. That if I ask you what is the meaning of value, what is value? I think that if we ask many people about what is value, we will have different answers to value. Linguistically speaking, I am a linguist. Value is a polysemic word, and it's the only word on earth that has only 2 meanings: the one and its opposite. It's the one and its opposite. Value means all what we can quantify, and value means also what cannot be quantifiable. So actually the word and its opposite. And what is the link? There is an inner link between these 2 values, 2 meanings actually. The one is all our beliefs, our values in plural, the intangible things that we actually believe in. And the other one is all what we can quantify. And from the beginning of the world, we separated these 2 meanings, and we are managing them separately. So the quantifiable value, it's about economy, it's about our bodies, what they need, what we can measure, and the other one is about our beliefs, etc., etc. And both are going towards 2 sides, and there is no economical model today, neither democracy, whatever you have, left and right, that join these 2 things together. And I think that we are living in a paradigm shift, as you said, and there is a huge opportunity with data and with technology and artificial intelligence to systematically link these 2 things together, working on how we can model these goals into real, tangible rules that can be measurable, because today we are not able to measure the impact. Today, every single company that is working on the global sustainability, they are able to trace that I am spending this money on this goal, but there is no trace on what is the real impact. And I think that this is the real problem, is do we have the willingness, the real willingness to measure the impact of our laws and our objectives. And the third one that I see extremely important is we talk about collaboration. Let's join efforts, let's join whatever we say. Do we have a collaborative platform that enables us systematically to collaborate and to measure our engagement and to actually agree on what we would like to see?
I've been in a meeting in the arena when there was Kofi Annan, granted a lot of people from the UN, and he stood there and he said, the UN is we the people. But my feeling is we the people don't know anything about the UN. And apart from that, how many people have any confidence in their governments? I mean, look what's going on in London right now. Most of the British have just given up. And if we can't get to those people, it's no good all talking about what we're doing and all these goals if we're not getting the belief of the people who are on the ground. Most of them are suffering so much, but we're not getting to them.
Well, among the proposals have been, how do we make the UN more directly responsible and linked to the people? And therefore change in General Assembly, so proportional representation, creating a second chamber representing the peoples of the world, the civil society organizations, to bring those voices in more directly. They have a voice as well, they have a way of contributing. Even though it's rather distant from the local to the global, these are all issues that we've tried to capture as part of the proposal. That's why we need these 10,000 meaningful conversations, to say, how do we take these nice ideas and build the links between that level and this level, and get people to see that they're relevant, get them to be involved, and through all the different elements of civil society, the business community, which is extremely powerful, more than governments in many places, that they would benefit from a level playing field globally. And how much easier would it be for a company if those limits were the same everywhere, and they didn't have to struggle with different regulations around the world. So business should become a very strong voice to push governments to take the steps that are needed.
I think if we sat here and made a list of what things are not functioning, we can easily fill in all those walls with post-its. The purpose here is what are the things that we are going to try? Even if they have been tried, what are the things that we are going to put on the agenda of 10,000 conversations that have to be tried or retried because there is a new level of consciousness now. So it is not a time to say, I do not count. So let's concentrate as much as we can on concrete proposals, which we will not have to implement right now, but added to the power of 10,000 conversations can be a serious agenda by 2020.
Yeah. And with the new technologies, we can do things that never been done before. With the internet, with people with cell phones around the world, there are new ways of getting people involved in those conversations, getting information. Challenge of artificial intelligence. It has enormous power for good or for evil.
Correct.
It could also be used as a tool to create a global dictatorship in which all of our data is sucked in and we're all manipulated passively. And therefore, and that's where we also need technology assessment and legislation globally to protect us from the dangers, to use the things for our benefits, and not to be trapped into being swept in the bad direction towards another kind of human catastrophe at the global level. Yes.
One thing that is coming strongly to mind for me, thinking about an update of this international or global governance called the UN system, is I think there is an opportunity and the first tool available through the SDGs that point to the direction of recognize that while the UN comes across very top-down and very macro and very distant and very abstract, it wants to recognize that this is not enough anymore. That if we want to harness that force, we need to be clear, and I think it's what you're saying or what I heard from you, Kate, as well, which is it needs to be recognized that it's both, it's the bottom up and the top down that will make it work. Because of course we need a top down and the macro, but we need to give the equal amount of recognition to the bottom up, whatever that looks like, so that we as individuals, as governments and as businesses can choose also when we are more part of the top-down approach and when we are more part of the bottom-up, and we can both play a double role. But we need a very clear and simple way to show this recognition so that we get buy-in from that second part that's kind of been left behind.
So far you've obliquely mentioned the internet, and one of the big problems is that of the top 20 technical companies in the world, 11 of them are American and 9 are Chinese. So there has to be some way of protecting the rest of us, from potential domination by the US and China. And there is something called the Internet Governance Forum. So maybe you could include that in your...
Yes.
As I say, we've already looked at the whole issue that the whole business community has escaped from global governance. And governments didn't want any interference with the right to make money. In the old paradigm, leave corporations to make as much money as they can, even if it leads to monopoly, manipulation, and all the rest of it. And therefore, it's one of the gaps that has to be addressed as we improve the global system, to put the necessary safeguards around the innovation of the private sector so it builds for good and not for bad. I've been involved in the World Economic Forum on projects to rethink how they address environmental issues and how you can build on the good quality innovation if governments provide the framework of regulation. What are the public interests that have to be respected within which this mechanism operate? But for the moment, that's missing, and that's why we're vulnerable to this takeover from the private sector, so to speak.
And maybe last year the GDPR, that was the European Union fighting back against companies. Too much data, and what are they doing with it? Abusing it?
Europe is responding because it's organized at a supranational level in Europe. We don't yet have a global supranational voice to push back against that global pressure. That's why we think that's an urgency to try to make some steps forward in global governance to give us the necessary tools and protections to avoid these things from going too far in the wrong direction.
The thing that I hear in a lot of this is that we have the ideas at several levels, and people who study problems in a complex world, they become experts, and they probably have very good solutions, in fact, and they're conscientious people, so they're not trying to hurt other people, but they're operating within a small context. So somebody said something about the UN being this big thing, that is unapproachable and so on. And it seems to me that the mechanism that would be best for your group to propose would be, how do you enforce the elite, which has been talked about, whether they be the members of parliament or the corporate headquarters, how do you force them to interact with the community, with the local mine workers or with the local farming groups? How do you force that elite grassroots interaction so that the elite, who are making some very good proposals and decisions, don't get isolated from people? And then you end up with, in the United States, all of the backlash against regulations, and in France, the Gilets jaunes, and in England, this impersonal European bureaucracy means that we've got to get out of there. And it's that breakdown between the elites and the local level. And if you could figure out a mechanism to enforce communication there, I think it would be useful.
Except that you're also facing there with the economic system, which in the last few decades in particular has focused on returns on capital, and as opposed to, and instead of creating employment for everybody, creating, you might say, an underclass of half the world's population at least. This is a fracture between those who've benefited from globalization on the one hand and those who've not benefited or even fallen back on the other. And so it's not simply a question of communication. It's also a question of the driving forces behind that have not looked for the good of everyone, and not saying, how do we create an economic system that benefits everyone, that makes everybody wealthy, that ensures that everybody has meaningful employment, that eliminates poverty in the world. That's where there's been failures that people are pushing back against.
But you have a very good point. And we have to think in our strategy how we could specifically address the corporate. But I must confess that right now, a very clear strategy of how to approach them other than the existing networks, we have to start thinking about it.
From having worked with youngsters as a language teacher in different countries for over 15 years, there is a lot of potential among children. Not only teenagers and young adults, but also children. And there's a thought that often comes to my mind, If we send a 10-year-old tomorrow, they have answers. They don't need to be taught. They know the solutions. And we live in a world which is so messed up because of the, I don't know, let's say the ego, whatever that means, that we've actually lost complete touch with, we were talking about values, with what is really important. And we need, as adults, constant wake-up calls. Every morning almost, before we start our day, we need to be reminded this is urgent. There's energy everywhere. What do we do with this energy? We are passive, and actually it's making us sick, being passive, because we want to do something, but we're not doing it. Children, all they want to do is to be engaged. And to be engaged really means transforming one action at a time, but parallel actions. There's no other way. We have to use that energy. I mean, we're actually making ourselves sick by not doing it.
I love what you say, and I think going back to what you said as well, Felix, in a way we need to use the technology that we have to enable people like the CEOs in big companies, the elite, and all of us to listen to people's perspectives and stories around the world. The people who, in the farms in Vietnam or in the factories in China or wherever they are in the world, any of us, we all have stories to tell about what's meaningful to us and what we see in our experience of the world. And it's only by really listening to that diversity of perspectives from a human perspective that we can then say, you know what, I can suddenly see how the strategy of our company could change to really harness the power out there or to help this solution and bring about a regenerative economy. So I think somehow maybe a concrete solution could be finding a way through technology and platforms and internet to share the voices of the people from that perspective, so that we can see we're not alone. There are millions of people who are working towards this and who want to contribute to this common vision.
Children, one piece of information. In the next few weeks, we are going to have a presentation of the project to the group of children age 15 who are working on their Model United Nations project, and we're going to share with them this idea so that they bring it up in their discussions about the United Nations. Some of those, their parents are CEOs. So one way to get to the CEOs is probably not necessarily through a meeting in them, but through their children. Jean-Franco.
I think today we have the technology to really make the people express their opinions, and we have the technology to aggregate these information. But there is no organization today worldwide that has taken that as a mission. And this could be one of the charters. If we look at the different areas where this has been applied and very successfully and very fast, because there's urgency here also. There's the problem of the timing. I mean, education is great, but it's going to take a while before people are convinced of the right ideas will actually be able to implement them. So we need also mechanisms that are immediately effective. If you look at the economics, for instance, the crowdfunding is an example of new ways of generating wealth. Using the technology and having contributions from individuals, and I think this type of mechanism could also be applied to, for instance, elections, where we could compare, for instance, the way people are actually elected in countries with maybe what's the impact they have worldwide, and maybe open the election to a much larger set of people. When you look at the U.S., for instance, their foreign policy is affecting everybody worldwide, while only the Americans being able to vote for the president. The technology today allows that. I think the leaders are very concerned about their image. I mean, the power, but the image. And this is a way to actually give them some feedback about the image they have as compared to their peers and globally. So I think from a platform standpoint, from a technology standpoint, we're ready. The means are not necessarily very important in terms of investments that would be required, but we need a body who has the authority and basically visibility to actually organize this.
Can I just mention that, so Responsible Mining Foundation, one of the aims is also to improve transparency. So all the research that's done on the 30 mining companies spread globally, the data is available to everyone. And so that's putting the power back in the hands of the people by saying, listen, this is how the company in your country is, how they're working, and it's about encouraging companies to put pressure on each other to outdo each other and improve the local economies and make sure that they're respecting the environment. And so that there's more systems like that in the world, then it will help with global governance.
Well, the SDGs were developed with 6 million people's input.
Yes.
They already used the tools to invite everybody around the world to come. What should go into the documents, what should go into the working papers, and so on. We put in a number of proposals. One of them reached the point where UNDP pulled it out in a box saying, Arthur Dahl had suggested that we should. It was possible for just individual ideas, constructive. So it's happened on occasions. It's not yet systematized. It's not yet organized. But the potential is there when we see the result. How much more this seems to reflect global needs and the SDGs than many other things the UN has done in the past. And again, this is where we need to strengthen those structures, to institutionalize, to make this a constructive, continuing process, get people much more involved, and take it and run with it within their own fields, or their own areas, their own circles of influence, beginning to build a momentum towards this movement for global governance that will help us to try to solve these problems, because we now have the tools, we see the urgency, everything is in place to maybe move where we never could have moved before.
Wanted again to emphasize maybe also a bit of a process idea and logic about engagement, so that if we are thinking of movement, that it's one of the crucial elements is that you actually speak about movement to whoever you want to invite into this one from the outset, and not coming too late in the process and saying, like, now we have already done a lot of work, join us on our thing, but that it really comes, that it gives you a sensation of that you have been seeing evolving, maybe in an observatory manner at the beginning, but giving you maybe from the beginning, also seeing the process of developing this as with a small start, but already with small possibilities of engagements into whatever, for example, if it's a platform or a website even, that already from the outset there is this walk the talk element of that this is a participatory process. This wants to include anyone from the beginning and not missing that element.
That's what the website is for.
Exactly, Felix, and it is very important. If you go to the proposal, you will see that it's quite detailed. The proposal itself is about 30 pages. It explains every proposal with background, reasons, etc. Why the issue of the veto, how you can make proportional representation for the, how China with 1.4 billion and Tuvalu with 20,000 people have both one vote at the United Nations, that it doesn't make sense, etc. There are a lot of details there, but the purpose of this movement is not to promote a proposal. The purpose of the movement is to promote the concept that we have to all reach 2020 with a larger proposal, which will probably take part of this. But it's not the details of the proposal that matter. What matters is that we all get on working on something that needs to be done, and it will be improved on the way. This book, before it comes out, it will be outdated.
And it says so.
because
this is a starting point for discussion, but we felt it was important to actually say, this is not something impossible, some utopia beyond reach. You can think of practical ways to take it forward. Let's all get involved and take it forward.
The proposal is just the background on which you can add or subtract stuff. It is not the idea that this is the proposal. By 2020, it will be very different from what it is as a result of millions, hopefully, of people getting involved. Sorry.
We need to look at both levels. We need to do something at the elite level, and particularly in relation to the financial system. Is that I think is at the root of many of the issues. The way the financial system works, the way the stock markets work, to me is absolutely crucial. We can talk to the CEOs, but the CEOs are bound by the circumstances within which they work, which showed where they had gone. They had bought a couple of shares in a company. I forget one of the very big companies. I forget which one it was. And they went to the annual general meeting to make their point that the company could be behaving more responsibly. the CEO was ready to get into a dialogue with them. And the hall, all the small investors, protested. Out, out, out. Because they were looking at their investors. This was not the CEO. He was ready to go into a dialogue. It was the investors who were not ready. So that's at the level I think we've got to address on the financial money side. But then when you come down to the children, the people, there, I think you said it, we've got to find a way of getting them to be aware of the interdependencies, really to understand how everything is interlinked, and that decisions taken here by a company or a government actually do affect them. And this fracture is very apparent in the Gilets jaunes movement in France at the moment. As a final point, that we're all very logical, I think. We like to think we are, and we try to propose an analysis of data and logical solutions. That's not what people actually decide on. That's why many of the opinion polls get it wrong, because people are not making their decisions on the basis of logic. People decide on the basis of emotions. And somehow we've got to speak to the emotions.
And this is this is the point that I wanted to mention, is that in the private sector, since actually the consumer is buying from an emotional perspective and not from a logic perspective, the sustainable goals for the corporation, the large corporations, is transforming this tool into a marketing tool and not into a governance tool. And the emotion is there, meaning that the sustainable goals in the corporations are actually under the hands of marketing, which means that this movement can be obsolete actually before even to make the proposals, because the investments on this from a corporation perspective is already ongoing in another direction. So if you want to, it is extremely important to bring actually awareness to the corporations, to the management of the corporations, to move this initiative from a marketing initiative to a governance initiative. And this is extremely important, and this is happening.